What is average cost? Average cost has a strong implication to how firms will choose to price their commodities. So in economics, the average cost or unit cost is equal to the total cost divided by the number of costs of a good produced or the quantity. Economics, ang cost curves ay isang graph ng mga gastos ng produksyon bilang isang pangsyon ng kabuuang dami ng ginagawa. So sa isang free market daw ng economy, ang mga productively efficient na kumpanya ay ino-optimize ang kanilang proseso ng produksyon sa pamamagitan ng pagliit ng gastos na pari-pareho sa bawat posibleng antas ng produksyon. At ang resulta ay isang cost curve. So, ito yung tinatawag natin na cost curve. So, for example, in this situation, the cost of producing a firm's output depends on how much labor and the capital firm used. A list of costs involved in producing cars will look very different from the costs involved in producing computer, software, or haircuts of the fast food mill. But however, the cost structure of all firms can be broken down into some common underlying patterns. When a firm looks at its total cost of producing in the short run, a useful starting point is to divide the total cost into The total cost is divided into two categories, the fixed cost and the variable cost. So, categories. So, in every business, or in every company, it has different types of cost. So, the total cost, the fixed cost, variable cost, marginal cost. When we say fixed cost, it is the cost that don't change with the amount produced. So, for example, aun ka sang pizza company. So, some pizza company is aun kan mo isa ka ubin lamang. Nyang ubin is itawag yan na fixed resource. So, it doesn't matter how many pizza yang kan mo ma-produce, you start to pay for another expenses, which is the salary, because you still need a manager, whether you produce thousands or one unit. And so, the manager's salary is what we call the fixed cost. The next is the variable cost. So, when we say variable cost, it is the cost that do change with the amount produced. So, for example, some pizza company gihapon, if you are going to produce more output, so syempre, kay gaim ka ng madaig na output, kinahanglan mo isab ng madaig na resources. So, yung raw materials, madagdagan yung raw materials, plus madagdagan yung electricity, and then labor. So, ngayang raw materials, electricity, labor are all examples of variable cost, so that the two types of cost, the fixed and the variable cost, must equal to the total cost. So, sayod kita na yung total cost is adto yan gagikan sa fixed cost and the variable cost. So, let's proceed in the marginal cost. So, when we say marginal cost, it is the additional cost of one additional output. So, if you are in a pizza restaurant, it is the cost of producing one additional pizza. It's the change in the total cost divided by the change in the output. As you can observe in the table 1, the first 5 columns of this table should look familiar, right? They came from the clip joint that we saw earlier, but there are also 3 new columns showing the average cost, average variable cost, and the marginal cost. So, these 3 new columns measures the analyzing cost on a per unit rather than a total basis. So, the column 1, the labor is indicated. Then the second column is the quantity. The third column is the fixed cost. The fourth column is the variable cost. The fifth is the total cost. So these 5 columns are very familiar to us. So finding average variable cost, we need to divide the variable cost over quantity. The variable cost of labor 1 is 80. Then the quantity produced is 16. So 80 divided 16 is 5. Finding the average total cost in labor 1. So in finding the average total cost is by simply dividing the total cost over the quantity. Labor 1 has 240 total cost and 16 output or the quantity produced. So 240 divided 16 is 15. The average total cost of labor 1 is 50. Average total cost is the total cost divided by the quantity of output. Since the total cost of producing 40 haircuts at the clip joint is 320, so the average total cost of producing each of 40 haircuts is $320 over 40 or 8 per haircut. Average cost curves is shown in figure 1. Total cost curve is typically U-shaped. Then the average variable cost curve is lie below the average total cost curve, and it is typically U-shaped or upward sloping. And then the marginal cost curve also is the upward sloping. Write the MC stands for marginal cost and the ATC stands for average total cost, and then AVC stands for average variable cost. That's it in figure 1. Average total and the average cost measures the average cost for producing some quantity of output. Recall that the marginal cost, which we introduced in the previous page, is the additional cost of producing one or more unit of output. So it is not the cost per unit of all units being produced, but only the next one or the next few. The marginal cost can be calculated by taking the change in total cost and dividing it by the change in quantity. For example, as the quantity produced increased from 40 to 60 haircuts, total cost rise by 400 to 320 or 80. Thus, the marginal cost for each of these marginal 20 units will be 80 over 20 or $4 per haircut. That the marginal cost curve may fall for the first few units of output, but after that are generally upward sloping. So the question is, where do marginal and average cost meet? So as you can see in the figure 1, that the marginal cost curves intersect the average cost curve exactly at the bottom of the average cost curve, which occurs at a quantity of 72 and cost of $6.60 in figure 1. So what are the reasons behind? So first reason is why the intersections occurs at this point is built into the economic meaning of marginal and average cost. The second is if the marginal cost of producing is below the average cost for producing previous units, as it is for the previous or the points to the left of where marginal cost crosses at the average total cost, then producing one or more additional unit will be reduced average cost and overall, and the average total cost curve will be downward sloping in this zone. Conversely, if the marginal cost of production for producing an additional unit is above the average cost for producing the earlier units, as it is for points to the right of where marginal cost crosses at the average total cost, then producing a marginal unit will increase. Average cost in overall, and the average total cost curves must be upward sloping in the zone. Why are total cost and average cost not on the same graph? So the total cost, fixed cost, and the variable cost each reflect different aspects of the cost of producing over the entire quantity of output being produced. These costs are measured in dollars. In contrast, marginal cost and the average cost and the average variable cost are cost per unit. In the previous example, they are measured as cost per haircut. Thus, it would not be sense to put all these numbers of the same graph, since they are measured in different units. Dollars versus dollars per unit of output. Because it would be as if the vertical axis measured two different things. In addition, as a practical matter, if they were on the same graph, totals for marginal cost, average cost, and average variable cost would appear almost flat against the horizontal axis compared to the value for the total cost, fixed cost, and the variable cost. Using the figures of the previous example, the total cost of producing 40 haircuts is 320, but the average cost is 320 over 40 or $8. If you graph both total and average cost on the same axis, the average cost would hardly slow. Learn by doing average cost and curves lessons from alternative measures of cost. Lessons from alternative measures of cost, breaking down the total cost into fixed cost, marginal cost, average total cost, and the average variable cost is useful because fixed costs are often sunk costs that once incurred cannot be reoccupied in thinking about what to do next. Sunk costs should typically be ignored. Finding the average profit. Starting with the equation for total profit above, if we divide both sides of the profit equation by quantity, we get average profit. Average profit is equal to the total profit over quantity produced is equal to the total revenue minus the total cost over quantity produced. So, if we separate the two parts of the right hand side, we get average profit is equal to the total revenue over quantity produced minus total cost over quantity produced. In other words, average profit is equal to average revenue minus the average cost. But average revenue is just another name for price as shown below, because average revenue is equal to price times quantity produced over quantity produced. Average revenue is equal to price, and substituting this back into the equation for average profit above, we get the average profit is equal to price minus average cost.